friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori. Today we are going to talk about all of the books that I read in the month of July. We're already 7 months through the year, and I know this is kind of a broken record sort of thing to say, but I'm just feeling like the year has gone by in an absolute flash, and I don't know how it's the end of July already. I read some different genres, I read some new to me authors, and I even finished my first series of 2025. It only took me 7 months to do it, but here we are. We finally got there. I finally finished one, and it feels amazing, and now I just want to do more of that. We're gonna start with Isaac's Storm by Erik Larson. This was a book club read. My husband and I are in a book club with two of our close college friends, and we've been doing this now for like 9 or 10 years, which is kind of crazy. And it was my friend Grunky's pick this time around, and he chose Isaac's Storm. This is the story of a horrible tragedy that happened in Galveston in the year 1900. And it was right around the time that weather service and the idea of predicting storms with science and technology was really starting to become more and more of a thing around the world. And there were some competing organizations, as there always are, trying to kind of one-up the other and get a monopoly on the reputation of being the people to predict all of the things, the fastest and the best and all of that, because, you know, why not? Unfortunately, that kind of early corporate competition cost a lot of lives, and this is the story of how a hurricane that wasn't supposed to be possible took out over 6,000 residents of Galveston, Texas, and completely destroyed the city in its early years. So I wasn't even aware that that hurricane, I probably had heard about it in passing, but I didn't know that much about it. And this book is written in a very interesting way because Erik Larson kind of gives us the history of the weather service in the beginning part of the book, and he lays the foundation with certain events and people that at first don't seem like we're really getting to the story of Galveston, but when it all comes together and you see this just perfect storm of bad decisions and the wrong people being in the wrong places and greed and all of these things, it really adds a heavier weight to the catastrophe in Galveston when it finally happens. The beginning part of this book is very science heavy, which I didn't mind at all. That's not the way my brain works, so I think I mostly got it. But it was interesting because he goes through what we know now and how we know how to predict and describe what happens during hurricanes now with the technology advancements and what had actually happened. And then he tells the story of the people that were impacted in Galveston. And you guys know I love a survival story. I love stories about people overcoming huge odds. This is a hard read because there's definitely some overcomers in this story, but there are also a lot of horrific tragedies and losses of life and families that were torn apart, and it's a very heavy read. I will say, though, that I felt Erik Larson did a fantastic job telling the story and honoring the people whose lives were lost, as well as the people who did survive the hurricane. And it's something that's so far beyond my comprehension. I can't imagine. You know, we can read stories like this and we can try and sympathize with how horrible these things would be to live through, but there's truly no way to comprehend the scale of something like this unless you've been there. I think this was a strong reminder of the fact that nature is strong and unpredictable and massively powerful, and we are all very, very small. So it was very sobering. This is a very, very heavy read. It's a very emotionally tragic read, but I do think that Erik Larson wrote it in a way that was very approachable and interesting and really honored the stories of the people who were involved. Next up, I finished The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea, and I did earn for my TBR game my Krupp character card for finishing this. This is a Asian-inspired, slightly dark folktale vibe story about a young girl who takes the place of another young girl who is going to be sacrificed to the sea god, and she goes down to this kind of quasi-spirit world and is trying to right the wrongs and trying to reconnect with the sea god who has been angry with humankind for a long time and nobody knows why. And the strength of this book for me was really in the world building. The way that Axio writes the story is very ethereal, it's very descriptive, it's very beautiful to read. While I did predict the ending pretty early on in the story, I don't know that it lessened my enjoyment of the story that much. And the reveal at the end was really cool, and the way she decided to take the ending and the reveals of the story. I do feel like the characters were a little bit flat, which, in fairness, you know, this is a book that's being written not quite to the complexity of a lot of the other books that I typically read, but I did find myself wanting a little bit more depth to some of the characters and a little bit more time spent on the relationships between them instead of the overarching conflict and the world. But again, that's kind of a personal preference. So overall, I thought it was really good. There were a few character motives in here or choices made about the characters that I felt were pretty rushed and just kind of thrown in there for kicks and giggles. However, I did think the writing was really descriptive and lush and beautiful, and the way that she described the different spirits and deities and all of that and the world that they inhabit was very cool. And like I said before, I definitely think that that's the selling point of this novel, for sure. So, and also this cover is just absolutely stunning. It's one of the reasons why I put it on my TBR in the first place. A cover can get me. It's true. I'll admit it. But yeah, overall, I thought it was a really decent read, and I'm glad that I finally got to it, because it's been on my TBR for a couple of years now. And yeah, it was a decent read. Next up, I finished Guard in the Garden by Z.S. Diamante, and this is the story of a dwarf who's a veteran, and he suffers a pretty horrible injury right away in the first pages of the book and is taken out of commission, out of his military unit. And it's his story of accepting himself and healing and learning to embrace an identity outside of himself as a soldier and warrior throughout the story. And again, I'm going to talk about world building for this book too, because the world building is really sweet. This is a cozy fantasy, so you have the town with a lot of warmth and all of the different families and shopkeepers that make it vibrant, and it's really beautiful, the world building, and it has a strong, wholesome feel to everything, which I really appreciated. There were some quirky, humorous moments within the story. I did feel that the writing style was probably the weakest aspect of this book. The story, the world building, the characters I really liked, and this is a message that I think is desperately needed, and fantasy is a fantastic vehicle to explore themes like this. It always has been. So I really applaud Z.S. Diamante for taking on what I'm sure was an incredibly personal story, because the themes are beautiful in this. I did feel like I wanted to be shown more than I was being told, and this story does lean pretty heavily on a telling style of storycraft, which did kind of irk me after a while. But overall, I think it's a beautiful story. For those of you that are big fans of cozy fantasy, I would definitely put this one on your list, because I think the themes, the characters, the world building are all really positive aspects of the story. For my TBR game, I was able to earn my Sergeant Detritus character card for reading this book, so I will be able to add that to my collection as well. And I'm so glad I finally got to this book. Next up is a book that I'm pretty sure wasn't on anybody's bingo card for me to read this year, including my own. I read Stormfront by Jim Butcher. This is book 1 in the Dresden Files series, which is a long-time, very beloved urban fantasy series in our fantasy community. And I have a lot of mixed opinions about this book, which probably doesn't surprise anybody. But I actually liked it a lot more than I thought I was going to, you guys, and that really surprised me. So Harry Dresden is a down-on-his-luck wizard who is out for hire, and he can be hired by random people, and he also works with the local police department in Chicago, trying to kind of shed a little bit of light on more supernatural crimes, because in this urban fantasy world, you have werewolves, you have devils, you have all of the fantasy creatures and tropes and magic and everything thrown in, and it basically asks the question, what if all of this stuff was actually real? It's still hidden from the general populace, and it means that Henry is kind of constantly walking this fine line between keeping things secret and not telling regular humans things that they're not allowed to know, and also making sure that he can actually help shed light on some of these supernatural cases. Harry is a very snarky, cynical wit, and also has a hidden heart of gold behind all of the I can do it myself and standoffishness that he presents as a facade. And he just feels like a very lonely character, and I think that's something that speaks very highly to the longevity of this series and why so many people are drawn into the series and then fall in love with it. I kind of picked this series up on a whim because it was on my phone, on my Kindle, and I needed something to read while I was sitting there, and I was like, I'll just try Stormfront, it's right here, I'll just whatever. And I was really surprised how fast it pulled me into the story. I will say that my trepidation about going into this series was founded in some ways. There are a lot of sexually posed scenes, for lack of a better descriptive term. I just don't feel that it's necessary, and there was so much of it in the first book. And while I was concerned about how male gaze heavy it was going to be, I was actually pleasantly surprised because, and I know that I'm only one book in, but I was surprised because Harry doesn't come across as a creep. He doesn't come across predatory, which I really appreciated. The way that he notices women is just very man-like, and while he had a few moments that I was rolling my eyes and shaking my head at, for the most part, it didn't, it never at any point gave me the ick. There was another character that did, but Harry didn't ever. And I was actually more taking issue with the way that a lot of the female characters in the story were written, because nearly all of them were sexually charged in some way or sexually damaged or whatever. And that got a little old faster than anything Harry did, to be honest. But again, I'm hoping going forward in the series that we will be relying less and less on that, and there will be some other elements kind of as the background of the series. I did really love, for those of you that know, I love Murphy. Murphy's a fantastic character, and I liked her a lot. I do think that the world building, like I said, is really fantastic for an urban fantasy. I think it's interesting, it's familiar, and it draws you in very quickly. So yeah, that was my experience reading Stormfront by Jim Butcher. I liked it a lot more than I thought I was going to, which was a pleasant surprise. I won't say that I didn't have issues with it, because I did. And probably for you guys, if you've been in the audience a long time, the issues you're thinking that I had with it are probably true. But yeah, I am going to continue the series at some point. I'm not in a rush, and I'm curious to see where it goes from here. Next up, I finished my first series of 2025 with The Fall of Babel, Book 4 in the Books of Babel by Josiah Bancroft. This, as many of you guys know, is my husband's favorite fantasy series at this point, and he absolutely loved it. And last year he asked me if I would read it, and I made my way through all 4 books within a span of, I think, 10 months or less, which is pretty good for me, to be honest. Sometimes I take a long time in between books, and I want to get better at not doing that. This book is very controversial, and that kind of surprised me, but a lot of people were very vocal about how they felt about this book. They did not like the beginning, they didn't like the ending. A lot of people have very strong opinions about this book. And I'm not going to say that those opinions aren't unfounded, because everybody's experience is going to be different. However, I was very surprised by how much I enjoyed this book. This was a 5-star read for me, and I think I still would say I like The Hod King a little bit better, but I really liked this book. I think one of the main issues people have with it is a POV choice that happens for the first 180-ish pages of the book, and I can understand why some readers would take umbrage with that and not like it as much. It didn't bother me, and I actually enjoyed getting that perspective and seeing information that had been previously closed off to us. I'm trying to be super vague because this is a book 4 in a series. And the ending is also something that I can understand why people would be frustrated with certain aspects of it, but I think it still remained true to the characters, which was a big deal for me, and in some ways felt very true to the whole series and the type of story that Bancroft was writing. And I think the character work in this series is some of the best that I have read in a long time. It is really, really good. And as I worked my way through the series and got to this last book, I just settled in and realized that I had come to care about these characters so much. And the way that Bancroft writes these characters, the descriptions, the prose is so incredibly talented. It is so talented, you guys. Some of the best prose I've read in a long time. And he really knows how to make his characters come off the page and feel like real people, down to the tiny details, which is something that I have a lot of respect for. And while for me it was sometimes difficult to visualize the environment that was around the characters or the technology that was being described, I have a really hard time visualizing that kind of stuff in general. The characters were brilliant, and the backdrop of the story is so unique. It's so wildly unique that it has to go up on my list of the most different and imaginative stories I've read in fantasy, right alongside things like Long Price Quartet. So that was my experience with The Fall of Babel. I got emotional several times during this book. I'm so glad I finally finished it, and I can add that to my list of finished series, and I can now talk to my husband about the whole thing, which he's very excited about. We've had some amazing conversations about this series already, and I look forward to discussing it more in the future. Next up is The Last Stand of the Stone Fist by Michael R. Miller. This is a novella that takes place within his Songs of Chaos series, which begins with Ascendant. And this is the backstory of a mentor character that we meet in Ascendant. And so you already know how this story is going to end, which is always tricky as an author, because you still have to make the story interesting enough that the audience is excited to read it and wants to know what happened in detail, even knowing how it's going to end. And I do think that Michael Miller pulled that off in this novella. I already knew what the ending was going to be, and yet I was immersed, I was invested in the characters, and I was feeling all the feels. I actually got emotional at the end, and it's just a short little novella about Brody, the mentor from Ascendant, and the things that he goes through prior to the events of that first book. And I do recommend, and I think the author does as well, that you read this after Ascendant. I wouldn't read it before as an intro to the series. I would still read Ascendant first. But I really liked this, and I wanted to give kudos to Michael Miller for the world building, because he's done one of the coolest things I've ever seen with the science of how a bond between dragons and dragon riders work that actually makes sense. Because in so many books you see that the dragon riders and the dragons, they're these, they're really tightly bonded. The dragon would do anything that the rider wants them to, but there's really not a good reason for that. You're kind of left there sitting going, why are these dragons doing whatever the humans want them to do? It doesn't make sense. And in the Songs of Chaos, I think Michael Miller has done a really good job of giving a solid reason as to why the dragons stay with their bonded human, and why that relationship is a two-way street instead of just being a human who wants to be superpowered. So, anyways, I finished Last Stand of the Stone Fist, enjoyed it. I think it's a solid novella, and I did also earn my Angua character card from my TBR game for that, so I get to add that to my collection as well. And last and least, I read 24 Shadows by Tanya J. Peterson, which, if you've seen my Goodreads review, you already know how I feel about this book. I picked this up as part of a Read It or Unhaul It challenge that will be coming out soonish. And what I will say about it is that I do not recommend that anybody read this book. And the reason for that is that this is the story of Isaac, who is a family man who finds out that he has dissociative identity disorder through a series of events that are quite heavy to read and not completely unrealistic. DID is a very misunderstood disorder, and it is also very individualized to each person who has it. So it's going to manifest differently for each person who is diagnosed with it because we're all different. However, the attempt to spread empathy and awareness for a misunderstood and often over sensationalized or stigmatized disorder in this book didn't work for a couple of reasons. The first is that the way these characters are written, there's a difference between things in life being dramatic and not in a negative way. They're just like, DID can be an incredibly dramatic disorder. But there's a difference between showing it in that way versus kind of a sensationalized melodrama where every tiny little thing is an overreaction and almost a caricatured response to things. And I found that the writing execution in this was just really poor. The writing style was very clunky. The character work was very overblown, overdramatic, and frustrating. And beyond that, there is a scene in this book that had me completely disgusted and appalled that a quote-unquote mental health professional would suggest this type of behavior toward a person in a dissociative state. I'm not going to say more than that. It's in my review on Goodreads, which I will link down below if you want to read further. But I was really disturbed, and it's an unfathomable thing that this author thinks it was okay to try to normalize this. So yeah, I'm really mad about it, in case you couldn't tell. And I almost didn't even talk about this book on the channel because I don't want people to go out and read it for themselves, which I can't. You guys can do what you want. But I really don't recommend this. I do not think that it is a good representation of DID, despite the fact that there are a lot of truthful things in here. There's a lot of information that is accurate. There's a lot of things that happen to the main character that do happen to people with DID. So there's just enough truth to be harmful, because then it seems like all of the things normalized in this book are fine, and they're not. They're really not. So anyways, that's all I'm going to say about that. I do not recommend you guys read this book. I do not recommend it as an example of normalized DID coping mechanisms and the way to handle DID. I don't recommend this. Please don't read it. I can't stop you if you want to, but please don't read it. It's not good. So anyways, that's all I'm going to say about that. So that, the month did end on a little bit of a low note, but we're doing okay. I'm reading a book now that I'm really enjoying, so things are getting better. But yeah, that was my month, and I feel like it was a very productive month. We got through some books that I've been meaning to read for a long time. We finished a series. We did a good job in July, I feel like, and I had a good time with almost all of my reads. So I would love to know down in the comments below. Please tell me what you read in July, what your favorites and least favorites were. Tell me anything you want about the books that you devoured in July. I'm really looking forward to August, and I hope you are too. I hope you have been having a great week. I hope that you are reading some 5-star reads, and I will see you in the next video.